All right, restoration industry folks. I'm here this morning with Tom from Large Loss Mastery. Now, if you haven't run into Tom, I don't know where you've been because this dude seems to show up everywhere. And despite, some limited physical impairments, you still get around, man. I'm impressed by you. I really am.
Well, temporary physical impairments.
That's right. That's right. He's going to be kicking butt here in just a few minutes.
Yeah, we got
Um,
we got 6 more weeks.
6 more weeks. So if you just happen to crawl out from underneath a rock, can you tell us what exactly is large loss mastery?
Well, what we do at Large Loss Mastery is we focus. I try to focus on everything that everybody else in the training world doesn't focus on, and that's the purely the management of projects, regardless of the size. And so we get into a lot of different formulas and techniques that we've used, over the last, 30 plus years. I started in the industry back in 1986, and things are a little bit different now than they than they were in '86.
I would hope so.
So yes, in a good way, because you'll hear my voice. I have year-round allergies, and they're from, that's my gift from the restoration industry over the years, because there were some things that we did back in the '80s that you can't do now.
Yeah.
And thank God, we have our standards, because back in the '80s we didn't have standards.
Hmm.
Well, all we had on the job training, and that was it. And so you learned and you move forward. And so what I've done is we took all the best practices over that time period, over the last 40 years. And because luckily, Anthony, I've been blessed to have worked with some of the best people in the industry, some of the most talented people, because back then, we all the talent was really on two or three companies,
Hmm.
when it came to large loss and commercial losses, because there wasn't a lot of companies that were doing it, in the early '80s and early '90s.
Hmm.
Now, they're all over the place. But back then, all the talent was kind of in on a few companies. Now everybody's fighting over the best talent, and so one of the things that people complain about is finding the right people to work for them
Hmm.
and everything. And so what we focus on with large loss mastery is going to be from estimating to invoicing and everything in between. And then this year we've plugged in some new guest speakers.
Okay.
Um, and so we have a relationship with JS Held with Joe Whites, who is the senior VP at JS Held. He's going to be joining me on tour this year on my classes. And he's got red flags, invoicing red flags, what they're
Hmm.
looking for, what sets off the audit process, what are audit triggers, all of those things. And so we've got him, and then we have Sarah Rayleigh, who focuses on uh, on documentation, and she is, for those of you who know Sarah, she is a stickler. She knows the rules. She can cite the law, and she does an incredible job with documentation. So that's they from our estimating or well, from our invoicing and audit triggers. They're kind of my new pieces in there. And
Hmm.
then I do a piece on estimating, scoping, contracting, and damage assessment, and all of the above. And then we also have a business development course, which I bring in some expert speakers to guide us through the business development piece. Um, and so we have our estimating, our project manager, our technician course, and our business development course. And our newest course was a CAD operations course.
Okay.
All of them we focus on management. And so it's for the technicians, it's going to be the technicians on the rise to become project managers. For the project managers, it's going to be them on their journey also. And so it's really to make sure that we're doing the jobs right, that we're estimating them right, we're invoicing them right, because that's the number one thing that we see out there, Anthony, is guys don't know how to invoice, and they can do a great job, but they'll put together an invoice that becomes what I like to call the disaster after the disaster. And so,
Oh, no.
yeah, and so it's like they do this great job, and then they do a poor job of documenting it, and a poor job of putting it all together, and then it doesn't make any sense. And I always try to tell everybody, it's like, you can invoice for what you do, but you can't invoice for incompetence. If you don't know what you're doing, then it's going to show in the invoice. The numbers never lie.
Yeah. No, I hear that. So take me back to the book of Genesis. How did you guys get started in working with restoration companies, or what was give me the birth story of Large Loss Mastery?
Well, Large Loss Mastery was born in 2016, or actually in 2015, I started to write the course manual. And it was really after, I'd been through 30 years on the road and everything. And I was thinking about something else that I could do in the restoration industry besides spending all my time on the road. And a mentor of mine, Lauren Reed, who unfortunately passed when he turned 65. And so he's been gone now for 9 years in June. And Lauren said, Tom, you got to take what you know, because you know so much, and put it down on paper and train and teach people, because people need to know what they don't know. And so I started to put the plan together, and I got the book put together, and we did our first class at one of our locations for one of our projects that we did when I was at Munters at the Superdome in New Orleans. And so that was our first class in 2016, in June of 2016. And unfortunately, Lauren passed 6 days before I did my first class.
Oh, man.
And so, yeah, so it was a super bummer. And he's with me all the time, though. I know he's pushing me and guiding me along and all that kind of stuff. So he's in a better place. He's where we're all trying to get to. And so so that was really the genesis of it. And it was all based on, because what I noticed, because I'm also a consultant, I'm a consultant, third-party consultant. So I do review files. I'm independent, so I'm not tied to any one group. And then I have the software part of the company, and then the training part of the company. And the software is the Edge estimating software that we brought to life in 2020, right in the middle of COVID, of course. And so, and what the Edge is back in 1998, another mentor of mine, Brad Key, created a tool called the Matrix. And the Matrix is a tool that helps restorers determine what their labor production rate should be for a specific project. So once we know what our production rate is, then we can size our crews properly. And so we put that together in 1998 because we were onboarding a lot of new people while we were at Munters back then. And that was about the same time that I drew out my sketch for my ultimate estimating tool, because I always wanted a tool where you could just sit down at your computer and you could enter in all the data that was related to the job, and it would give you a number. It would give you a square footage number. It would give you your total value, your total billable cost, your ROM number, as we like to refer to it today. And so it took me a while. I wish I would have put it together in 1998. We might be living in a different world, but
Mhm.
better late than never. And so by the time we got it together here in 2020, I'm very excited about it. It's in constant evolution. We're always doing updates. All the updates that we do to our software come, and also to the training program, come from the restorers. And so, or from the adjusters or from consultants that go through the class or are using the software. And so my job is just to bring it to market and then recognize and get feedback from everybody that's using our product to make sure that we're always constantly upgrading it, and we're in a constant evolution cycle where we're providing what's next. Because I always challenge everybody to ask themselves three questions: what if, how much, and how long? And if we're always asking ourselves, and this is a program that's always running in my head,
Mhm.
so I may be, going through, oh shoot, um, uh, I'll just use LaGuardia Airport in New York.
Mhm.
And for everybody that's been through LaGuardia over the last 40 or 50 years, it wasn't the most pleasant place on the planet. And but the new addition that they've just added, that they've just done, is absolutely beautiful. And so when I was up there last January, um, and I landed, I couldn't believe it, because I spent a lot of time in New York in my early years in my career, and I couldn't believe it. It's like, wow, this is LaGuardia. What happened?
Mhm. Yeah.
And and so what kicks in my head is like, all of a sudden, that what if, how much, and how long scenario kicks
Mhm.
in my head. So by the time I get to baggage claim, I already have a number in my head. I have a square footage number in my head. And
Mhm.
that's what we teach at the class, is we teach the attendees on how to do that themselves. So
Mhm.
when they do that, they're always ready for when that moment happens and that job comes through. All of a sudden, they're ready. They have a number in their head already, and then all they have to do then is get all the details of the project and
Mhm.
dial it. And so I'm a keep it simple, stupid guy, and so I like to keep everybody. I think sometimes we overcomplicate things here in
Mhm.
the last 5 6 years. We've taken some things and made them more difficult than they need to be, and I try to remind people of where we came from. And
Mhm.
so in my classes, I came to realize um, that I'm old, and so and it wasn't until it took me just a couple of years ago to realize that you're about some cases I'm 30 years older than some of the people that are in my class,
Mhm.
and so I had to come to grips with that, which wasn't easy. It took therapy. And so lots of therapy for me to be okay with being in 60 years old. And so I started to realize that, what, I'm part trainer, part mentor, and part historian. And because for the younger generations, it's very important to understand where we came from. You
Mhm.
know, how have we estimated and how have we done projects over the years? Because the one thing that has stayed fairly consistent is how we do projects.
Mhm.
Um, we have better software and tracking tools than we've ever had before, and I encourage everybody to use them. Um, but when it comes to actually physically doing the work, we're kind of doing the projects the exact same way that we've always done them. Uh,
Mhm.
for example, if we had a fire job tomorrow, we could walk on it, and our crew would be working, and there's going to be somebody cleaning a wall with a
Mhm.
dry sponge, with a Kim sponge or dry sponge or whatever you want to call them. And that has been going on since the beginning of time. And it's
Mhm.
in fact, that's how I started in the industry, was in Dallas, Texas, with a Kim sponge in my hand,
Oh yeah.
wondering, wondering why did I leave school? And
No, and I remember it from my personal experience, right? It was that here's your chem sponge, here's your 99, here's your degreasol, here's a bucket and some rags.
Yep.
Call me when you think it's done, and I'll come back and tell you if you're right or wrong. And I tell that story quite often because you take the millennial and zennial workforce and you treat them like that, and they're like, screw this, I'm out of here. I'm not going to deal with this guy, right? Whereas if you take the time and you explain why, what you're actually doing and why the work is important, like from a non-technical perspective, and what you're hoping to accomplish, the overall mission of the project, if you will, a lot of the times that workforce is highly motivated and they're like, okay, I get this, I'm going to go kick butt, and it leads to better project outcomes. So what common struggles do you see from your view of the world within the industry? And like you're a visionary of sorts, so you probably have a good idea of, hey, here, and you know what, I think the solution to this problem lands somewhere here. So give me your top problem you see in the industry and where you see the solution coming from.
Well, there's a few. One is experience, because we're going through. Well, we're coming to we're in the point of the evolution of restoration, where a lot of the old guard is retiring. And and that's not only in restoration but in consulting and also in the adjuster world. And so what we have now is we have inexperience on all levels. And that inexperience can show itself when you'll have maybe an adjuster who doesn't know what they don't know, and that you have a restorer on a job who doesn't know what they don't know, and all of a sudden together they're a hot mess. And so I because you're losing that experience level that really formed the restoration world that we know today, because all of the standards and all the guys that, for example, all the guys that created the original standards for IRCRC in the mid 90s, they're all, I contributed to Mickey's stuff that Mickey put in, and Mickey Lee and all those guys, we're getting older, we're aging out. And so the next generation, getting that next generation following in there is key, is vital. Getting that next generation of leaders, of teachers, of mentors, of historians, to come along. I still got about another 8 or 9 years. I love what I do, and Mickey Lee is a mentor of mine, and shoot, Mickey just retired at, I think he's 72 now. Mickey, don't kill me if I misquoted that. And so the other thing that I see is the invoicing piece. It's, again, we can't just invoice for everything that we do on the job and think that it's going to be okay. Because the number one thing to remember, that might be the first, as a restorer, that might be the first time that we as a restorer did that job, or did a hotel, or did a retail facility. But it's not the first time that it's been done. It might seem like it because it's to us, it's the first time that we did it, but it's been done thousands of times before, and all of that data is out there and in the experienced hands of some of the old school, the old guard. It doesn't take us long to evaluate a project and know that something is wrong, that the restorer didn't know, maybe didn't know what they were getting into, or maybe they did and they just invoiced it anyway. And so we see a lot of stuff in the invoice. And when I say the numbers never lie, and they don't, because the first thing that we'll do as a consultant is take that file, that job file, and we'll do a quick square footage number on it. And so that's going to be taking the total of the job divided by the square footage of the job, the square footage of the affected area. And that's going to give us our square footage for that project. And we'll look at that file and you can almost tell immediately that there's something wrong just by that calculation. And so I encourage all restorers to understand where you are on your jobs, understand your square footage numbers, understand the historical square footage numbers, where you should be, how to stay off the radar, because we want you to get paid. We want you to get paid for your services that you do. We don't want things to be held up. Nobody wants to wait to get paid. And so, and I always encourage people too, because a lot of times what will happen, Anthony, is restorers will wait 30 days until after they're done with the job to invoice the job. And so what did that just do to our invoice? So if our client is used to paying 60 to 90, we just bumped ourselves into 120 days, not even knowing. And so we want to make sure if we're on a large project that we're doing periodic invoicing. So we're putting together an invoice every 7 days. If we're on a 28-day job, we're going to produce 4 invoices off that job. And we're going to start with the first one because we're going to ask for money down, and we're going to provide an invoice for that. So we've invoiced right from the beginning of the job. So by the time that 28 days has gone by, we've already invoiced 4 invoices. We're not waiting to the end. And so that's one of the things that I see. Guys just need to understand how to invoice and what to invoice, what not to invoice. It's very similar to our scope of work. The scope is there. It's our guideline. It's our roadmap of our project. It tells us 2 things. It tells us what we're going to do for that budget number, for that ROM number, and what we're not going to do.
Yep.
And so those are the 2 most important things that we always have to remember.
Awesome. Where do you see the industry going in the next couple of years?
Wow.
Bust out your crystal ball.
Well, I think there's a man, if I can tell you from 1986 to now, it's like, wow.
Yeah. I'm sure.
Nobody's seen this. Nobody's seen this in 1986 and 1990. Nobody's seen this coming. But we're in a very dynamic industry. And I think, with the introduction of AI, I think AI is going to play a big role, especially in residential. I think you're going to see carriers lean on AI to kind of give them their square footage number, for an estimate. So you'll go to the job, do your damage assessment, take your pictures, do all your videos, all of that, come back and you'll enter in the information and the system will tell you what your price should be. I don't like it, but I do think that that's kind of the direction that I see things going. I like the human factor, Anthony, when it comes to what we do. And the human factor in estimating is the competitive edge. When you have people that are competing and you put together your number, my number versus their number, we're competing. I really would hate to see us get to where, we're just, put it into a computer and it spits out, everybody gets, $10 a square foot or something. And fortunately, I think that AI might try to take us in that direction. And I don't want to see that. I want to see the human factor still involved in estimating, so that no estimate should be the same. And because that's the human factor. That's the competitive side of things. And that's the way it should always be.
Gotcha. So looking at the relationship with RIA and large loss mastery, what makes us great partners from your perspective?
I love RIA and love being, an affinity partner. It's a new program, a couple of years old. I'd like to see more action out of it. So everybody that's listening, please look into the Affinity Partners, and we've got some great deals in there. For example, you can get 20% off anything that we do at Large Loss Mastery, and we would love to get more action out of it. So go check it out. It's a great program. It's there to save you money, and so I love it. Unfortunately, I had my surgery, so I won't have a trade show booth this year at the because I wasn't sure at the time that I had to commit,
Yeah.
and I wasn't sure if I was going to be where I was going to be and everything. And so I will be there. I'll be speaking at RIA as well as I'll be in the Affinity room. I guess what is that? What it's called?
Mhm.
Where and so I'll be in there and I'll be all over the place at the show, and very excited about it. It's here in Florida, so that's always good. It's about 3 hours away from me, and so it's always exciting. And so love RIA. I'm a big fan and love the direction and everything that's going on with it. I'm encouraging restorers to be more active and really get involved.
No, I agree. I do wish that I didn't have to fly 14 hours to come to convention, but I'm jealous of your 3 hour drive for sure. But I
Well,
wouldn't miss it,
well,
right? Like,
you've got a pretty good situation there, though.
like I said, I don't complain. When I complain, people get mad, and I don't complain anymore.
I
Um,
can't. The beach is 600 feet over there, so I can't complain either.
yeah. So if folks want to get a hold of you to learn more about, the Edge software or any of the training that you guys do, how do they reach out?
They can reach out to me directly at tom@largelossmastery.com, or they can send me an email. Well, they can go online at largelossmastery.com or do my email, and we'll get in touch right away. Everything kind of filters through me, and so I deal with most of them, well, 95% of our clients directly myself.
Awesome. Personal touch. That's good.
Yep.
And then, kind of my style on these RAA lives, I always feel bad because I show up and I ask you a bunch of questions. And I always feel like it's fair to turn the tables and say, hey, look, is there anything that you want to know about me or RIA or any questions that you had?
Well, what can we expect in 2025 that's different with RIA?
So like there's so much going on, but I'll tell you the two things that I'm most excited about. First and foremost is, everything that's happening within the AGA and the carrier task force, the inclusion of Mark Springer as one of our advocates. And, there's been a lot of work that needs to occur to improve the relationship between the restoration industry and the insurance carriers. I know that there's folks out there in our midst who want to go full scorched earth with this situation, and that has not historically been how the RIA gets things done. We try and focus in a very collaborative nature, understand the pain on both sides of the equation, and work things closer to the middle, so then that way we don't make enemies out of our efforts, we make friends.
Yep.
The other one that has my attention is everything that's happening within the legislative task force. There's a lot of legislation both at the federal and the state level that has been proposed that could be either beneficial or a challenge or serve as a barrier for restorers. And the legislative task force is tracking every single bill across all 50 states to identify those that need some sort of lobbying or intervention, situations where we feel like we can jump in and make a difference. It is in its infancy, but one thing that's been made clear over the past year is how big the need is for somebody to look out for the industry on the industry's behalf and stand up those advocacy efforts to make sure that, hey, like, we want the restoration industry to be a good place. And so any bits of legislation that show up that make that harder, we're going to be very quick to jump on and lobby on behalf of those efforts.
Yeah. And to go back to you, when you asked me when I started Large Loss Mastery, that was one of the reasons, was that gap in the industry between us and the carriers, between the restorer and the carrier, between the restorer and the consultant, was to narrow that gap. And that's why this year I've been blessed again, and with a good friend of mine who is the senior vice president of JS Held, and we're putting together some specific programs to help that happen, to narrow that gap between what's expected and what's happening. And because that's still a goal of mine, is to narrow the gap, narrow that gap between what we know and what we don't know, and understanding of what needs to be invoiced, can't be invoiced, how, what categorizations do we need to use. All of those things play into what we're doing. And I pride myself on giving my attendees everything that we've ever learned, so that they can leave there knowing what we didn't know, so they don't have to make the same mistakes that we made. And you don't want to do that. Some of the stuff that we did back in the 80s and early 90s, you don't want to do. And I want to make sure that everybody is doing the right things, following the best practices of the industry and the guidelines, the standards, and narrow that gap so that we can get closer instead of further apart.
I appreciate that, Tom, and thank you for all that you do on behalf of the industry. Personally, when I was running Premier, we sent Marlone to one of your classes in, I think it was LA. And, I told him, because we had a one-on-one meeting immediately after, and I'm like, yeah, bring everything back. Like, let's go through it. And so he sits down and he's got like 8 stacks of paper in front of him, and he's just staring at him, and he's like, I'm sorry, boss, I don't even know where to start. There was so much here. And I'm like, pick one, pick your favorite. Let's go through it, right? So I know the depth with which you cover the subject matter specific to large loss is pretty deep, and I'm thankful for what you do.
Thank you very much. And we tie it into a case study, so everything that they learn, they put into action into the case study. And then you see Astro over my shoulder. That's the award that the winning team, and we just had our class here in Cape Canaveral last week. And our winning team did an excellent job on the case study. We were out at Kennedy Space Center, and we always tie in some cool location, so that I try to be different. I try to be outside of the box a little bit, because I want restorers to live outside of the box. Don't confine yourself to just one thing. And you might be there and you might say, Tom, we don't do large loss. Well, I'll tell you this: you don't do large loss yet. It's my job to have you ready for when that moment happens, and that knock on the door happens with a project that you're not going to turn it down just because you don't do large losses, right? You're going to do it. And so it's my job to make sure that when that knock happens, you have the answers.
Awesome. Well, thanks for spending some time today to talk with us about industry stuff and learn a little bit more about large loss mastery and your software, The Edge. Anything in closing?
Anthony, it was a pleasure. I look forward to seeing everybody in April.
Yep.
In West Palm.
Yep, it'll be great. I'm looking forward to it as well, even though I got to fly. I always joke wild horses wouldn't keep me from showing up at RIA. It's the one place I will fight like hell to get to every year.
Well, after last year was a record a record crowd.
Mhm.
I expect this year to be even better.
I think you're right. I think you're right. All right, Tom. Thank you so much for your time.
Anthony, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.
Cheers.